Did you know armies use sonic weapons to disarm their opponents and launch unexpected attacks? Militaries utilize the negative effects that sound can have on the human body to create terrifying sounds of war. These sounds make people feel dizzy, disoriented, nauseous, and can even cause hearing loss. This type of warfare dates back thousands of years and is still used today. Join us as we travel in time from the Aztec period to the present day and take a deep dive into this unique form of weaponry. Not all war weapons are designed to kill. Sometimes they're created to instill terror into anyone who comes across them. Armies, patrol squads, and police units utilize sonic weapons to manipulate soldiers and disperse crowds. Before we go into more depth, you're probably wondering how effective this form of combat is. As a species, we are extremely sensitive to intense auditory overstimulation. It's the reason you cover your ears when you hear a siren or find certain sounds like nails on a chalkboard unbearable. Loud noises are very damaging to the human body. One-time exposure to the roar of a bomb or siren can damage the cells and membranes in the ear, resulting in temporary or permanent hearing loss. It can also cause psychological distress, such as severe anxiety and panic attacks. People who encounter these types of weapons can also experience dizziness and disorientation, making it easier for an opposing army to attack. With all the technological advancements that have happened over the 20th and 21st centuries, many assume that manipulating sounds in combat is a new phenomenon. In fact, many people did, until a 1999 archaeological dig in Mexico City, when archaeologists unearthed an early example of this weapon. As they excavated the temple of an Aztec wind god, they found the skeleton of a sacrificed young man. He was clutching two whistles, prompting the theory that the whistles were part of a human sacrifice ceremony and intended to imitate the winds of the underworld. However, another theory also arose, based on the unbearable sound the whistles made. These weren't the kind you would use in sports or to play a melody, because they let out a horrifying scream that was extremely uncomfortable to hear. Therefore, it was concluded that the whistles weren't part of human sacrifices, but instead were a form of weaponry. It was reminiscent of an air spring type of whistle that archaeologists discovered from the Mayans, which also sounded like the cry of someone being slain alive. Archaeologists called this type of whistle the Aztec death whistle for understandable reasons. Imagine you're the enemy of Aztec soldiers, and the first thing you hear is a scream that sounds like a human being tortured. Let's skip forward to more recent examples of terrifying sounds of war. If you've ever watched a documentary, TV series, or movie about World War II, you've probably heard the distinct sound of German propeller planes flying low overhead. The German Luftwaffe used the Junkers Ju-87 dive bomber to carry out many airstrikes. These planes were used to bomb Spain during the Spanish Civil War, causing mass casualties and devastation to its targets. It was also this model of aircraft that was deployed during the Battle of Britain. British citizens would dread the overhead roar of the Junker Ju-87. The sound alone was distressing, but as the war continued, it became associated with death and destruction. Many people didn't realize that the distinct noise it made was far from coincidental. The planes were built with two propeller-driven siren attached to the undercarriage legs. This meant that when the aircraft entered a dive, the sound would increase. It also got louder based on how quickly the aircraft descended. Although they became a symbol of the war and part of its soundtrack, the planes had a lot of issues. They had to fly low at a slow speed, which put them at a disadvantage to more advanced enemy aircraft. However, its infamous sirens instilled fear in a way that other planes couldn't. The sound they made was named the Trumpets of Jericho. And it didn't just traumatize enemy soldiers and civilians. German pilots found the sound extremely distressing, especially when it distracted them during diving procedures. Germany wasn't the only country using sound-based weapons during the Second World War. The Soviet Union created the Katyusha, a rocket artillery with the capacity to deliver explosives with far more efficiency than conventional artillery. These rocket launchers were the first mass-produced self-propelled artillery in the Soviet Union and could be mounted on ordinary trucks. The Soviet Scientific Research Institute planned to create a rocket launcher on a truck chassis to launch rockets at ground targets. There was so much secrecy around the artillery's design that few soldiers knew the strength of this new form of rocket launcher. Its biggest advantage was its ability to deliver such a massive attack that it would disorient the opposition and give soldiers the chance to flee before a counterattack. By 1941, the Katyusha was ready to be used in battle. It was used to attack German train stations with brutal efficiency. Roughly 320 rockets soared toward the targets within 26 seconds. People described them as soaring like comets before exploding with a crash that sounded like thunder. The weapon exceeded all expectations, not just due to its ability to cause mass destruction, but also because of the sound it made. The incoming rockets made a loud hissing sound, and several seconds later, it detonated 3.5 tons of explosives. It created a thunder-like roar. Germans ran from the train station in horror, and soon the Katyusha had a new name, Stalin's organs. The organs were associated with terror and chaos. They were also dually effective, as they were deadly, but also with the help of their infamous noise, created mass fear. Although World War II ended, the use of terrifying sounds of war did not. Let's fast forward to the Vietnam War. American soldiers needed all the help they can get when it came to defeating the Viet Cong, even if it meant psychological warfare. They discovered that the Vietnamese believed that their bodies needed to be buried in the place they were born, or they would forever wander the netherworld. This steadfast spiritual belief inspired Americans to create a unique type of mind control trick. In 1964, soldiers at a South Vietnamese radio station decided to exploit the fear that a soul would be trapped in the netherworld by creating a series of ominous sounds and voice recordings. So they created Ghost Tape Number 10. It began with Buddhist funeral music, which was accompanied by the cries of a man in agony. Then a little girl called for her father and begged him to come home. The recording ended with the voice of a dead soldier informing his comrades that his death was senseless and that he was stuck in the underworld. It also included the voices of South Vietnamese soldiers, who imitated the cries of the wandering souls of Viet Cong soldiers. US soldiers blasted the sounds as they hid, hoping to launch a surprise attack on their enemies. American troops had to be strategic about where they played the tapes, as they didn't want their unsuspecting South Vietnamese allies to hear the recordings and panic. Despite the effort put into weaponizing the opposition's religious beliefs, the project's success was questionable. Perhaps Viet Cong soldiers found the tapes disturbing the first time they heard them, but soon they realized that the Americans were trying to trick them. So they listened carefully to the tapes so they could locate the enemy's position and aim their fire. The opposition was quickly canceled, although troops still utilized sounds to disarm their enemy by doing such things as recording a tiger's growl and playing it through loudspeakers. A more modern sonic weapon is the long-range acoustic device, also known as the LRAD. While it is often placed in the family of modern sonic weapons, its designers, American Technology Corporation, denied it was a weapon when it was first created. It is a sound cannon that can injure, repel, or incapacitate a target. And its two main abilities are voice amplification for communication over long distances and emitting an alert tone. This tone reaches 160 decibels. For context, that's 40 decibels louder than the volume a jet engine makes when it's taking off. We already covered that loud sound is very bad for the human body, as it causes pain, disorientation, nausea, migraines, and hearing damage, and this is especially true when it comes to LRADs. There are numerous reports of countries using LRADs as sonic weapons, such as the US using them in Iraq to disperse crowds from locations known to be terrorist targets, or the Israel Defense Forces using them to break up Palestinian protests. However, they're not always used in combat. These weapons are so small that they fit on cars, helicopters, and patrol boats. Cargo ships use them to protect against pirates, and police units deploy them to control large crowds, especially during protests. The terrifying sounds of war stay with us long after the fighting ends, and create a unique type of fear that armies have weaponized for centuries. Sonic weapons create a unique sense of terror that allows armies and law enforcement to gain advantages while the opposition is incapacitated. Whether you've heard the sounds in TV shows or movies, or you've encountered them in real life, one thing's for sure: a sonic weapon creates a physical and psychological trauma that is as significant as any other battle wound.